Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our CaTS Community Scholars Program, also known as LACoSP Preparation Webinar Series. We are so excited to have you join in and listen to some great information that we have to share with you regarding community engagement, regarding partnerships, and several additional topics. My name is Dr. LaKeisha Williams. I am Director of the Community Engagement and Outreach Core. Also serve as an associate professor at Xavier University of Louisiana College of Pharmacy. And so, once again, being a part of our Community Scholars Program, the goal of that is just really allowing both a community partner and an academic partner to come together to serve as principal investigators on a project. Specifically, this goes beyond just research. This allows both that academician and both the community member to effectively come together to solve a solution, to develop, if it's either some type of strategy to a health problem that may be out there. So we're so excited to have today's session entitled Fostering Community Academic Partnerships. We have several different sessions in store, so we ask that you continue to join us. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So today we're going to be talking about community engagement. How do we define it? What are some approaches to it? And potentially, what are the specific principles and challenges as it relates to community engagement research? Also, more importantly, understanding how should we build partnerships? So what are some of those best practices? What are some of those strategies for that academic partner as well as that community partner to effectively develop a partnership? And so the learning objectives for today's presentation are to discuss the different approaches to community engagement, to explain key principles and challenges for community engagement, as well as learning and listing strategies to promote community academic partnerships. So first of all, before getting involved into talking about the discussion of partnerships, we want to talk a little bit about what is community. And then also specifically looking at a couple of key terms. So when we think about community, this is a group of people that are linked by social ties. If it's a specific organization that may have the same language, that may have the similar occupation, ethnic group, faith, all of the ones they share, the ones that are listed here, they share some type of common perspective or interest. And so really being able to have a better understanding of what are we considering to be that community. And then when we look a little bit further as to the definition of community-based organization, the National Network Libraries of Medicine defines it as an organization that is representative of that community, that signifies that segment of that community, that meets the human, the educational, the environmental, or public safety needs of the community. So it's really that organization that embodies all of those different shared characteristics that I talked about previously and how effectively everyone comes together. What we're going to be talking a lot about today, and you're going to hear community engaged research, understanding the difference between community engaged research, community based participatory research. But today's focus is really going to be focusing on what is really community engaged research. And sometimes you'll hear various topics, but really being able to have a better understanding of what it entails. And so that is, what is that cooperative approach that includes those partnerships, those collaborations among the researchers and among the community organizations and those agencies. And so what's important about community engaged research is that each person, each entity, whether that's a researcher, whether that's a community organization, is able to learn from each other. And so we're able to share that expertise. We're able to have a bi-directional relationship. I'm learning from you, you're learning from me. And we're being able to collaboratively come together to focus on this particular common goal. And so I definitely want to give you an overview of what are the differences in those research approaches. Like I mentioned, you may have heard community engaged, you may have heard community-based participatory research, but there are some differences as it relates to those two, even in addition to the traditional research approaches. So when looking at that research objective across the board, and I'm going to kind of focus on community engaged, we look in terms of seeing that the community gives that input. That community is going to identify what are those relevant issues that they are facing, and we're having that research or the researchers or the investigators to drive what we're looking at. We're driving the research based on those community needs, based on the community insight, based on what the community is feeling is important to them as it relates to various issues. When we look at the study design, um, we see that in community engaged research, everybody is synonymously working together. So those researchers are working with the community. They may be working with that community organization. They may be working with those community individuals to ensure that the study design is connected across both parties, that both parties are being able to agree, that everything is acceptable on both ends. And the difference when we look at CBPR is that that community is involved. They're intimately involved, but they may not necessarily provide as much insight and they may not provide as much engagement. And so that's the difference of community engaged, is that definitely those community members they have a seat at the table. And so they are involved from the beginning of the development of this project, from the initial stages of having an idea to being able to moving forward. And please feel free at any time, you can go ahead and put any of the questions that you may have in the chat. And so we'll go ahead and answer those a little bit later on throughout the presentation. When we look at recruitment, retention, specifically for community engaged, the researchers consult with the community representatives on the recruitment and the retention strategies. So it's not whereas the researcher is coming on the back end, they've already developed the topic, they've already developed the research, they've already developed their strategy of recruitment. That doesn't happen in community engaged research. The goal is that the researcher is coming to that community from the very beginning, before they even think about how they are going to recruit any individuals. And so the community is involved. The community gives that insight. The community is really being able to tell the researcher, this is what's going to be important. These are the necessary steps of how you should recruit. This is something that we may not feel comfortable with. So they're going to have that level of trust. They're going to have that level of transparency. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those coming up as well. We see instrument designs, like I said, specifically when we think about community engaged research, the community is involved. And so they're very, very involved throughout this entire process, from recruitment all the way to data collection. Also, what's very important is that the academic researchers, once that project has started, they're keeping in constant conversation with the community on what is happening. They're making sure that the community is aware of the various steps that are happening within that research. They are having understanding of those results. So that researcher is sharing those results of that information. And this is very, very important, especially when we look at community engaged research, because a lot of times the community they want to know the results. They want to know how it's affecting their community. They want to know what are the next steps that are involved as it relates to what has been found within that particular project, which comes into the dissemination. And so this is very, very important to making sure that we are having community members, those organizations that have been involved, also involved in the writing process of the dissemination of this research. So oftentimes they are serving as the co-authors, they are serving as the lead authors on specific papers. And so everybody is collectively coming together to be able to have that jointed seat at the table. So these are going to be some of those differences as it relates to community engaged research versus community-based participatory research. And so, like I mentioned, one of the things that's very, very important, and I want to kind of look at this degree of community involvement. When we think about community engaged research, when we sometimes you may hear about community based participatory research, you've probably also heard about community based research, practice based research, community driven research. These are all different um, titles. But specifically, when we look at community engaged research, it incorporates different levels of community engagement. If we're looking at something that's more of an less intensive, we have the community assisting in the steps of that researcher design study. So, like I mentioned, the community is involved from the recruitment aspect. They're giving the researcher insight on what are the necessary steps, who are the potential organizations that may be involved, what are the organizations that may have some more insight or passion about this particular topic. Then when we move more to medium level involvement, we see that the community will also not in a will also in addition to assisting with the study design, but also the recruitment, the data collection. They're also providing some feedback on that study design and those findings. And then that community partner is now acting as a subcontractor within a defined set of responsibilities. And so we're not going to get a little bit as involved in talking about subcontracting into this presentation, but we will have that information in store into future presentations because we know the importance of making sure of our community being compensated for their time. So with that being said, that community organization or that community individual is now serving as that subcontractor, and they're including on that budget, and they're made sure that they're including as an important aspect of the funding to contribute back to their time, to their insight, and so they are compensated accordingly. When we look at the last level, which is involving that community on a more intensive level, we're seeing that the community is fully collaborating in all aspects of the research. They are developing the study question. They are coming to the community advisory board with the topic, with the idea, and the researcher is coming to that community advisory board with the research, with the topic, with the idea. And in that community advisory board, those community members are being able to give insight. Oh, well, maybe that's not going to work for our community. Maybe this is a way that it's going to, be able to help our community. They will give all of that insight. They'll give the necessary feedback of what's going to be important in the success of this project. They're also going to be involved in writing a portion of that proposal and designing those methods and really being very instrumental in implementing what's happening, in addition to understanding and analyzing those results as well as disseminating those findings. So as we see overall, when it comes to community engaged research, we see that the difference from that compared to CBPR and some of these others is that the community is really having a seat at the table, and they are involved in all aspects, and they are serving as an equal partner to the academic researcher or to that specific academic institution, depending on their level of involvement. So this shows the community engaged research continuum. And so it just kind of further goes a little bit more deeply as to what I've just explained. It talks about the different levels of research that I discussed previously and how the community is involved. So we see that when we're looking at something that is more investigator driven or community placed research, yes, the community may be involved, but it's not as heavily involved. They are not heavily involved compared to when we are looking more of our community-based participatory research, and full complete community involvement is where we're seeing more of our community-driven research, our community-engaged research. And so we see that it differs across the board and the sharing of that power differs as well. So really just being able to have a better understanding of, if you are a researcher, where does your research lie? Where does it fit? And making sure that we're involving community, because many times we are thinking or having an idea of research that is involving that community. And so that community wants to be involved in this entire process. So specifically, be thinking, well, what are the principles of community engaged research? And so I want to kind of talk a little bit more specifically about those principles. And so, of course, it is successful. There has to be mutual respect. There has to be equity in the partnership. There has to be transparency and a strong communication commitment. And this is very, very important when we look at community engaged research. We're going to talk a little bit more deeply about it. These are the pillars of what's important. For example, if I'm having an idea of, doing research in hypertension, and so if I specifically know that I am involving the community and I'm involving those individuals and I'm looking to try to make sure that I'm coming up with strategies and solutions to decrease adherence within this particular population, in order for me to have a successful component, a successful research project, I have to make sure that I am including community. And I want to make sure that that community is involved at the very conception of that idea from the very, very beginning, and making sure that we are able to collectively come together equally and having that equity within this partnership and being transparent and being honest and open and upfront. And that's one of the hallmarks of when we look at community engaged research. And that's what's very, very important with community, is that they're going to tell you, be transparent. Oftentimes, these partnerships are very fulfilling, and oftentimes it takes time. It takes time to develop that partnership. It takes time to be able to build that trust. This is not something that could potentially happen overnight. Sometimes it may take years in being able to develop trust within partnership, within community. But it's vital to make sure that once we get to that process of being able to educate the community about research, to educate the community about those that research entire process or clinical trials or clinical trial participation, those steps, like I mentioned before, the respect, the equity, is vital for the success of that project, and is also vital for the success of the community, because the community will be more engaged, the community will be more involved, and they will be more passionate about understanding what is their role, understanding the results of that project, and being able to disseminate that information to others as well. So, some additional principles when we think about community engaged research: recognizing and building on the strengths of those community organizations and individuals to address those community issues. So, if we're thinking about involving specific community organizations, what is their mission? What are their values? What is their vision? What is their focus area? Is that relatable to what I'm thinking as a researcher in regards to research and investigation? On the flip side, for my community members and individuals, if you're thinking, you're saying, hey, I want to find out more resources about this particular topic. I want to find more resources about getting involved in research. And so this is where it's very important to make sure that that community member, you as a community member, is able to collectively come to that researcher to inform them of those issues that are occurring in the community. And in that way, that research could be driven by those community issues. And so, specifically, some additional principles I mentioned: respect, cooperation, collaboration. And these are very, very important, because with that respect, with that cooperation, with that collaboration comes trust. And that's what's very, very important, is that that trust is built with the community. We definitely want to make sure that, especially when it comes to looking at research, this is a sensitive topic. And so we want to be able to respect the wishes of the community. We want to be able to respect their desires We want to be able to hear their insight. And we want to be able to go to them and be able to identify and let them know the importance of the research. But it takes cooperation and it takes collaboration. And it's important to make sure that that relationship is not just built on a one-time sense, that is built continuous, and that it is long-standing and is long-term. And that's what's very important coming from the community as well, is that they love the fact of researchers being able to engage them, and they love the fact of researchers being able to provide the results of what that research has found. Also, too, some additional principles of community engaged research is just really being able to prioritize those benefits to the community, understanding that it is going to require a time commitment and attention to maintaining those relationships, like I mentioned. Also, too, understanding that we're going to be learning from each other, so co-learning, and it also takes capacity building among partners. Sometimes community organizations may not have the capacity building for research. They may not have the staff that's needed to be able to conduct recruitment or data collection or anything of that sort. So really being able to collectively figure out how can we increase those resources for the community, how can we be able to pour back into the community and educate them as it relates to those specific processes. And so, with that, combining knowledge with action. So, how can I be able to, as a researcher, share that experience to the community? As a community member, how can I be able to provide that information, expertise, those insights to the researchers as well? So, it is that bi directional. And then lastly, looking at researchers and community partners negotiating a term of engagement. So this is when we look at in terms of what we call a memorandum of agreement or understanding. And so it's really being able to sit at the table and say, hey, these are the expectations of both parties. These are the roles. These are going to be the responsibilities. This is the monetary support. This is the compensation that's going to be provided, and really being able to come to some agreement and understanding in terms of the amount of compensation for the time of the community partners. Also, it lays out the activities and the outcomes that will occur, as well as data ownership and dissemination of the research results. So this is very, very important to really be able to develop this memorandum of agreement or understanding, having those community members or community organizations listed as a subcontract, a consultant, whatever it may be. More so, a subcontract allows them to have a bigger role. And so that way we're able to sit at the table and have a conversation, more agree and understand as it relates to the partnership that is going to be developed. So, what are some of those challenges in community engaged research? When we look at anything, whereas we have different partners coming together, sometimes there may be some potential challenges. And so, although the goal is that we are trying to make sure that we're having that equal collaboration, that we're having that true partnership, there may be some tension that may exist. And so when we look at one of the first ones, unequal distribution of power and control of funds, sometimes, especially if those funds are going to that academic institution that is driving that research, being able to realistically and I would say agreeably compensate the community organization appropriately for their time and for the information that's going to be given. It's very, very important. And I'm seeing this now, especially being mandated by NIH, the importance of community involvement, the importance of community compensation, the importance of community being able to sit at the table. So making sure that enough funding is provided to those community organizations to provide them with the necessary activities that are going to be implemented. And so this is very, very important when we look at even some of the other things. I know sometimes, depending on that particular grant or whatever it may be, when we look at academic institutions, certain indirect costs are already implemented within that particular budget, which may sometimes decrease the overall funding that could be allocated to community or to other entities. So just being very frank and very transparent and very open about what that is, but coming up with solutions and strategies also. So for my academicians out there, for my researchers out there, having a conversation with your Office of Research and Sponsored Program, your SPA, whoever it may be, to have a conversation of how can I be able to allocate more funding to the community so that they are compensated accordingly. And this is very, very important because we know that sometimes our community organizations may not have the infrastructure, they may not have the capacity building resources, but we want to make sure that we are helping them to build those infrastructures that is going to support that research. And overall, that will continue to allow them to be able to reach that building, that research building capacity. Another challenge that we may find is just differences in education, income level, access to information, perception. And this is very, very important because, and also too, what's key is that regardless of the role that each person is playing, that we are able to come down to a level of education, a level of communication where both parties are able to understand. So even for instance, I'm a clinical pharmacist by trade. When I'm in the clinic and I'm having a conversation with my patients, I don't want to give any type of medical jargon because my patients may not understand this information. They may not be able to go home. They may not understand what the definition of hypertension. They may not understand diabetes. But if I come down and they understand sugar, they understand glucose, they understand certain levels of vocabulary that are on a lower grade level, then it helps to be able to open that line of communication. The same way we may have that conversation, or I may have that conversation in the clinic, is the same way that I would have that conversation with community as it relates to research, so that the community is able to understand what is going on, what is the meaning of these different terminologies or vocabulary or issues, really being able to have an understanding of how they can relate the information that I am conducting the research to real life situations. And that's how we're able to finally be able to come to some type of agreement of being able to decrease the disparities of what we're seeing. And that's the goal. And so we definitely want to be able to really have a lower line of communication vocabulary when we're having these conversations and being able to understand and learn from each other at the same time. Some additional challenges, like I mentioned earlier, trust is very, very important. Um, I cannot stress the how great the importance of trust is. Very, very important. If we break the trust of our community, we will not be able to have their buy-in. We will not be able to have their involvement. We will not be able to continue further projects. And so it's very, very important that we understand where is the community coming from, understanding the sensitivity of what occurs, being able to communicate effectively and address those barriers, address those challenges. And so we have listed here in terms of that's when we look previously in terms of why research subject is no longer utilized in the language as it relates to research. And that's because historically what it was related to be. And so that's why more lately the term participant is viewed as a more respectful term. And so just really being able to build that trust with the community and having that understanding. These are some misconceptions in community engaged research. And so I'll kind of go through a few. The first one, common misconception, we already do community engaged research. You may hear this a lot of times. We hold 2 health fairs with free screening every year in low income neighborhoods. And so clarifying that is that yes, the health fairs, they're providing information, they're providing screenings, It's serving as community outreach. However, when we look specifically at community engaged research, those researchers are engaging with the community members. They're trying to understand what are those health concerns. They're trying to understand what are those needs. They're coming collaboratively to work together to address them. And so that researcher may be very well right there in terms of being able to have a conversation that goes beyond the research. And so even past the data collection, they are able to provide education. They are able to provide resources to the community that goes beyond those specific steps as well. We also see in terms of some common misconceptions of community engaged research. My research is strictly quantitative. So I can't use community engaged research, and that's not necessarily the case. It's not an approach to research. It's not a research method. It's stating that the community organizations can be involved in research that uses both quantitative and qualitative. So we're using potentially this survey data. We're using all of that information collectively, but at the same time, we're using the comments from the community. We're using specifically what the community is saying word for word and being able to collectively utilize that information to come up with some type of strategy or solution to improve overall health outcomes. Another thing is that first we need to design our study, write the proposal to get the research. A lot of times we hear this happens often, time and time again. And what's important with community engaged research is that no, those steps don't come first, that you go to the community, that the community is involved at the very beginning. You have not even designed your study. You have not written the proposal. You are bringing the community. You are going to the community to gain their insight on this particular topic to see if it's going to meet their specific health needs. And so they're involved from the very beginning. And so they're being able to give all of that input, their interest, their expertise as well. Everyone on our research team attended a cultural competency training. So we don't need training in community engaged research. We all do. As researchers, as academicians, as community members, it's important to understand it. And so research term that has completed it, when we think about community engaged research, that's not the same thing of cultural competence. It involves practicing those partnerships that are equitable. It involves practicing the collaboration with the community organizations. So I'm taking that knowledge and I'm actually moving now into action. And so, of course, we see that from that, that's going to affect all of the aspects of the research process. So this is very, very important in really being able to decrease those misconceptions. So my question for you, are you ready to develop a partnership? From the information that you have heard in terms of community engaged research, community-based participatory research, you even saw the traditional methods. Are you ready to develop a partnership? And so I have some different keys that are listed here. Thinking of it in your mind, are you ready? Because we know that readiness is both a state and a process. And it changes with time. We know that, and so that's why it's very, very important to have some flexibility, to be able to make sure that we're open-minded in this entire process. And we know that readiness is essential for long-term sustainability. We don't want the research with the community to happen at a one-time event, a one-time situation. We want the community to know that we're investing into them long-term basis. So whatever it is that I am finding out or I'm utilizing, or I'm trying to identify as it relates to this health issue, we want to make sure that we are consistently having that relationship with the community and that this is something long-term and it's continuing beyond that end of the grant period. It's continuing beyond the dissemination of those results, and we're having that constant conversation and relationship with the community. Now, readiness, though, is also influenced by various factors. Are we a good fit? So am I thinking that what I'm doing, is that a great fit with this potential community partner, this community organization, whatever it may be? We also talked about capacity. I'm looking at the team. How many staff members are involved? If they don't necessarily have the staff members, how can I be able to provide some additional funding to assist in maybe them finding some staff members? So those are all different things that we want to consider, as well as operations. How does that community organization operate? Is it going to be beneficial to what I'm doing, maybe potentially as a researcher, and vice versa? So for my community organizations, thinking about the researcher, is that something that is of interest? Is it going to meet the needs of the community? And we see, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later when I show you this model, that all of those factors are contextual to the community as a whole, the organizations as entities, and the partnerships as an independent entity. So when we look at this and we see this awesome model, and this is coming from Medical University of South Carolina. They have just an awesome resources. Feel free to go on their website and identify some additional information. They have this model that talks about, are you ready to partner? And so really being able to have that understanding of, okay, what is our mutual interest, first of all? Is it a good fit? Are we able to share those values? Are we able to have this commitment? Are we able to mutually benefit from each other? And then being able to look at those capacity aspects as well as the operation aspects. So capacity, I talked about it in terms of the staff members, the leadership, inclusivity, making sure that we're having all of those different resources, and then looking at the operations. Are our goals similar? Are we able to be transparent and honest? Are we able to share that data across the board and making sure that we're having that communication? Are we able to have some type of conflict resolution? And are we sharing equal powers? So what is happening as it relates to that? Is that something that I, as a researcher, can do at this particular time? And that allows that knowledge base to see if we are ready for a partnership. Overall, what we see happens is that if all of these pieces are collectively working together, and I mentioned you're going to have some ups and downs, you may have some challenges, and that's okay as long as we're able to come to some type of resolution. What are the outcomes overall? How effective? And so we see that overall, we want to make sure that we're having that sustainability with the partnership, that we're continuing to grow, and then overall, most importantly, having that impact on the community. How are we able to improve those health outcomes? How are we able to decrease health disparities and overall achieve health equity? And so that's the overall goal of when we look at this readiness model. So I have a couple of strategies for you for successful partnerships. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to kind of expound upon it. And so successful partnerships are very, very important. When we're looking at community, we're looking at academicians, academic institutions collectively coming together. They both have an equal part. They're sitting at the table. It's going to require careful planning, communication, and collaboration. So just kind of remembering those aspects. And so I mentioned this before, really being able to invest this time. It's a commitment. It's not something that is overnight in regards to building those relationships. And it has to be built on trust and respect. And that's what's very, very important, making sure that that trust is developed between both parties. Secondly, what are our communication? Where does our communication stand? We want to make sure that we're having effective communication that is going to accommodate the preferences and the needs of all parties. So if we're thinking of this particular partnership between the community and the academic or the researcher, what are the needs of the community? What are their challenges? What are potentially their health issues? And at the same time, what are the needs of that researcher as it relates to research, as it relates to goals, whatever it may be. Making sure that everybody collectively is coming together to have that open line of communication and understanding that we're meeting the needs of both parties. The third one is shared decision making. So this is very, very important. Making sure that everybody is able to have those conversations. I talked to you a little bit earlier about when we think about ultimately community engaged research, the community member is involved in every process. And so we're able to share that insight across the board. The researcher is able to share expertise, they're able to share their knowledge, and the community is able to share their knowledge and expertise, and they're able to share their insight. So we have that shared decision that is happening across the board, which overall fosters, if you see in number four, fosters that learning. So it fosters that bi-directional learning opportunity for both partners. It helps that expansion of that knowledge. It also expands opportunities as well. And then one thing also too, what's very, very important is just being able to remain open to feedback. It may not go completely how we planned it. It may not go exactly how we set it out to be. There may be um some conflict, but it's specifically how do we resolve the conflict, being able to be open to that feedback, being able to be flexible and maybe make some adjustments. And then that way we're able to come to some type of resolution. We're able to come to some type of agreement to develop those strategies and those solutions. And that's based on both parties. So, with that being said, it's important that we have resource allocation that is equitable, that is inclusive, that we're able to talk about those power differentials, that we're able to promote diversity, that we're able to just have a candid conversation about all of these specific topics. And then overall, once we're able to develop this successful partnership, once we're able to work through those challenges and we have developed that trust, we have developed this long-standing relationship, we can recognize and celebrate those achievements and celebrating those milestones reached. And this is very, very important. I have seen so much tremendous work coming from our LACoSP scholars, and so they do, especially because we have that academic and that community partner, they have done some phenomenal work that has just been able to build long lasting relationships and additional opportunities. And so that's very important when we think about those strategies for a successful partnership. So I'm checking in again and asking, are we ready? And so before developing that partnership, and when you're in the process of having those ideas of how can I be engaged in community engaged research, how can I identify partnerships, how can I identify these community organizations, or I'm looking at these researchers, answer these series of questions. What is the health issue that you plan to address? Is it going to be effective for both parties? Is the community of interest? And so this is very, very important. Is the community interested in this health issue? And how do you know that? What have you done? Have you went to the community advisory board? Have you walked to that community organization and had a conversation with them face to face and being able to understand what they are facing that is outside potentially a researcher's research area of interest? So, really being able to understand what they are facing, what are those challenges? Also, to understanding what are the vision and the goals of that partnership. Where are we able to share those common goals? How are we able to share those similar values? And so that's very, very important. And just really being able to understand the dynamics of both partners that are working together. And this is something that takes a lot of time. It's a learning process. Community organizations have to better understand the process in terms of academia, and then also academicians and academic institutions have to understand the process of how community organizations may run. And so being able to effectively come together to see how can processes change? How can we make it a little bit more effectively for us to collaboratively work together. And so there are different ways and different solutions of being able to come together. Knowing what is the commitment. So really being able to understand the time commitment, the understanding, the project, all of those different things. Is the time right for this particular project? Or do I need to maybe revisit it? Have more conversations with additional community members? What are maybe some other projects that have already been conducted in this same community? I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. Or I don't necessarily want to continue the same work that somebody has done, unless it's achieving a different goal and is achieving something different that somebody has not achieved. So really being able to understand and ask all of those particular questions. What have been the lessons learned? And so really being able to understand maybe what are some of those lessons learned, but what are some of those potential gaps? And then knowing what has to be done. Who is doing the work? When, where, why? All of those different questions are important to ask because it further solidifies that partnership. It further solidifies what are we, the common goal of both parties. It solidifies more of an understanding and trying to get to the root of what it is that we're trying to look at. And overall, both community and academic is able to collaboratively come together and work together. So I have several resources that are listed here, some great books. And I know these definitely come from in terms of just being able to have a further understanding of community-based participatory research, looking at health equity. I also talk to you all about the toolkit. Not only is Medical University of South Carolina has an awesome toolkit, but there are several other toolkits that are available. And I also want to inform you as well as the resources that the LACoSP Community Engagement Corps provide as well. So if you're needing consultation about your project, if you need access to Community Advisory Board, we have it. Please visit the LACoSP website. You are able to be able to identify all of those resources that we provide. You can put in a Spark request at LACoSP. There are so many different resources that we have to share. We have an awesome team. I want to recognize Dr. Margarita Echeverry, who is on this call, who leads our LACoSP program. She has been phenomenal for the last couple of years being able to lead this program. She's been very instrumental in really being able to mentor and engage not only our participants, but anyone who has any questions. So I definitely want to provide just a big thank you and just appreciation to Dr. Echeverry. Some of our additional team members, we have Dr. Brawls, who is with Pennington, as well as Dr. Jennifer Caldwell, and Ms. Deandra, who is our Crown Community Engagement Coordinator. And overall, I hope that you have had the opportunity to learn so much more about community engaged research. I thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity to provide this information to you. Please join us for these upcoming sessions. And at this time, I will open up the floor for any questions. Dr. Henry? Dr. Henry, I think you're still on mute.
So do you see an increased enrollment, like a before and after, as you work in different communities? Do you see an increase in involvement and enrollment in clinical trials or some of the research that you're doing?
I have. I really will say, and I saw a change and a shift since COVID. So especially after COVID, really being able to make sure that we receive the input and the insight from the community. We had the involvement from the community. That relationship was built. Those partnerships were built. The trust was built. And what has been interesting is that we've seen a lot of those community members that have now more of a desire to learn more about research.
Mhm.
And they have been the ambassadors, I will say, and the liaisons for going back into their community to having these conversations. I think it has tremendously increased when we looked at COVID-19 specifically. We saw, especially our African American community, more participants being involved, especially when it came to the vaccine and being able to identify would this work. And so I personally, especially working with LACASP, working with LaCille, Louisiana Community Engagement Alliance, saw the increase in involvement in clinical trials, in research. That was one of the goals of that program in itself, was to educate the community more about research, being transparent. We're not trying to recruit. We're not trying to have any type of data collection, but we just want to give you the education and the resources. And I found that that was instrumental in being able to say, hey, this is the information. Now you take that information and you make a decision based on what was given. And, some people may still say, hey, I'm hesitant about it, but at least I saw a shift in more of a greater understanding about research and clinical trial participation.
And
Very.
also, I would like to clarify a little. Clinical trials are not community engaged. Usually the clinical
Oh,
trials, you design the clinical trial, you got the funding, and later you want to invite the communities to participate and enroll participants. So it's a different process. And I have seen personally a lot of clinical trials that are not addressing the needs of the community. For example, all the documents are in English and the patients do not speak English. Literacy, health literacy level in the consents, they look like written more by lawyers than for the participants. And
some of them are.
still today, clinical trials talk about the research subject. They are not talking about the participant. So there is a lot of work to do in the teams that want to submit proposals for clinical trials. They need to learn a little more about how to involve the community when they are designing the protocols, the consents, and everything. And so this is the reason why we have so much work today to involve participants or recruit participants in community trials, because they were not thought or designed with the community or the target population they are looking at.
No, I 100% concur. I think it's a matter of working hand in glove with community engagement personnel so that they can, people like Lakeisha who's out there, knows the community, would make a world of difference. So,
Yeah, and I agree. I that was very, very important. And we're seeing now an increase in that, whereas a lot of the pharmaceutical companies
mhm.
are approaching and having these conversations and saying, hey, well, what are the insight that you are hearing from the community, as it relates to this? But like Dr. Echeverry mentioned, there's so much work that has to be done, because it's important to have these conversations before that trial is even developed. And I think
Right.
that would be key in making sure that if they go to the community first, understanding what it is, what are those barriers, what are the key concerns, all of that. And then that way, being able to develop it based on that, you can see some type of progress. May not ultimately be where we want it to be, but at least progress would be achieved. But I will say that that has increased also in terms of more pharmaceutical companies having conversations with us to find out about the insights from the community. What is the community saying as it relates to that? But like mentioning, we definitely still have a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you. That helps a lot.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So I want to clarify that this is just like the basics of community engagement definitions and the barriers or that we have when we work with the community. As part of this project or this LACoSP program, we are developing retreats or symposiums that are more in person and are more practical, and when we are have community and academic members working together. So you're gonna receive invitations on those once we define the dates.
Thank you, Dr. Echeverria, for clarifying that. So that's why we're so excited. And we thank each and every one of you for just joining us today. More in store. We will have additional sessions. We'll be sharing that information. Please feel free, if you haven't done so, go on the LACATS website. You can see information about the Community Scholars Program. Letters of intent are due March 1st. The application is due May 1st. And even if you're not thinking about applying for the Community Scholars Program this time around, feel free, go on the website. You'll find just so many different resources that it can assist you in just learning a little bit more about community engaged research as well as other topics. And so with that, I definitely want to thank each and every one of you for joining us, and take care. And please share this information with your networks, with your colleagues. And I look forward to seeing you the next time that we have our seminar series.